This is Jay Tholen.
And this is Chris Schlarb.
And you're listening to Pixelated Audio.
Episode number 103, featuring the music of Dropsy.
Dropsy is that clown that the folks around town would warn you about. They'd tell you of the monster he became, how he killed his own mother by sparking that circus tent blaze. Dropsy is that clown that the folks around town are wrong about, and he cares for them all anyway, with his signature smile and warm, damp, loving embrace. Dropsy is that clown that has secrets even he doesn't know about. Mysterious mysteries await. With the help of his friends, he'll uncover it all in the end.
All right, welcome back to the bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast, Pixelated Audio. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene.
Hey, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Dropsy, a game that's very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, the track that brought us in was the Eternal Hug Part 2 off the Dropsy Eternal Hug EP by Jay Tholen. And it was the song used in some of the trailers and lets you kind of know about the premise of Dropsy, I guess. So today we're really excited because we have both the creator, Jay Tholen, and the composer, Chris Schlarb, joining us to talk about this special title. Welcome, guys, and thanks for coming on to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you guys give us some insight about yourself? I guess we can start with Jay.
Yeah, sure. I am a 31 or something, I think, 31-year-old dude, originally from Florida, and I moved to Germany after Dropsy came out, because I was then able to move out of my dad's house. And I now try to make games as a professional-ish thing. Yeah.
Nice.
And I'm mostly an artist, I guess, but I do music and game design too. So.
Nice. And Chris?
Yeah, my name's Chris Schlarb. I'm a 41-year-old musician, composer. My wife and I own a studio called Big Ego in Long Beach, California. I was born and raised here. I'm trying to think. I used to run a record label called Sounds Are Active way back when, and if I remember correctly, that's when Jay and I kind of first got on each other's radar. And then
I stalked you on Facebook back then. I think I sent you guys a demo. It sucked.
Yeah. And we were putting out records by like weirdo Christian outsider like groups like Soul Junk and whatnot. And I think Jay, had been like a longtime fan of those groups. And then one thing led to another. And I did the soundtrack for a game called Night Sky that Niflis put out or created. And then sort of like maybe as a that was sort of maybe the thing that put it over the edge of maybe me, kind of jumping into Dropsy with Jay.
Your record, Twilight and Ghost Stories, was one of my favorite records too. Like, I was listening to that at work, and that was also Night Sky also, because I knew Niflis growing up in the click and play community. It's like a nerdy community, but Twilight and Ghost Stories, that record really, I was like, oh, I gotta talk to this guy.
Well, that's funny because that's what got me the job working on Night Sky. And like Twilight and Ghost Stories is probably one of the most like avant-garde pieces of music like I've ever put out. It's like a 40-minute sort of sound concrete kind of, piece with like 40 different musicians and people kind of floating in and out. So it's hilarious that got me like, got my foot in the door with like video game music.
Totally.
So, Jay, could you tell us a little bit about that track that brought us in? What was the story behind? You wrote actually kind of a lot of song story pieces before Dropsy.
Yeah. So that was a track I wrote around the time of the Kickstarter, around 2013, and it was a little too late to use on the Kickstarter. And so I had it sitting around, and I had sent it to Devolver, who's my publisher, like pretty early on, and they were pretty excited about it as like a possible trailer song. And there's actually a little story here because Chris got the Dropsy band back together after they had already recorded like the whole soundtrack, and they recorded an amazing trailer song that never was used, and it's a medley, and because Devolver wanted to go with my song, and I felt so horrible because they all went into the studio again, recorded this amazing track, and I think, yeah, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've totally forgot about that, actually.
You forgot? Yeah, is that still laying around on your?
I'm sure
computer?
it's somewhere. Yeah, that's funny, man. I I do remember, basically like, doing the whole soundtrack, and we like got it mastered and the whole thing. And then I was like, man, I can't wait to see the trailer. And then they didn't use like any of my music in the trailer for any of the games. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Right on.
Well, if you can find...
In retrospect, it was all my music in the trailers. And in retrospect, like, I do wish like we would have split it evenly, like one of mine and one of Chris's or something like that. But it was just, there was so much going on. And I was just, okay, trailer's done, whatever.
Just ship it, get it
thing.
out.
Yeah.
Well, if you still have that track, Chris, and you wanna share it with the world, we'd love to put it on the website or something for people to listen to after listening to this episode.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a look. I'm sure I got it in a folder somewhere. I don't throw any of that stuff away, and I seem to remember it being pretty good.
It was cool.
I honestly forgot. I forgot it even existed. I mean, I probably work on 2 or 3 records a month and have since we did the Dropsy soundtrack. And so it's kind of like, oh yeah, that exists someplace.
Yeah. My song, that song I recorded, I added in these. So the progression, it's like probably the most standard progression ever for songwriting, and so I did this thing where I was like, oh crap, this sounds so basic and boring. So then I added like that 5/8 part with like weird add 9 chords and stuff in there, in the middle, because I was like, oh, this isn't, if music people listen to this, so I had to throw in like the proggy part so that even though it sounds like, I don't know, babies playing the instruments or something.
It's a very Jay Tholen thing to do.
It's a very Jay Tholen thing to do.
It's just a very quirky track, but I mean that's something I've noticed in a lot of your tracks, which I love, and I think it really fits.
Yeah. So actually, real quick, I wanted to ask you about the vocalized parts. First of all, who is your vocalist, and why are they so awesome?
In my song, me.
Yeah. I knew that it was a loaded question.
Oh, thanks. I just recently got this pitch correction software where it shows you how on the notes you are, and I now never want to sing again because I'm not even like in the range of the note that I want to hit most of the time.
Oh, that's great.
So I don't know. Maybe
it works. It works in context.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's talk about Dropsy a little bit. Dropsy, the point and click Hugventure, was released for Windows, Mac, Linux, and a bunch of other stuff on September 10th of 2015. It was released on iOS a few months later and Android the following year, published by Devolver Digital and developed by Tendershoot and A Jolly Corpse. Before we get started talking about Jay's company, I kind of want to talk about the publisher for a second. Jay, you had mentioned Devolver Digital a little bit earlier. For those of you not familiar with the company, Devolver Digital is becoming really quite well known in the indie space. It's an American game publisher founded in 2009 in Austin, Texas, by two publishing veterans, Mike Wilson and Harry Miller. Their first published title was an HD remake of Serious Sam, The First Encounter, but they really hit it big, though, in 2012 when they published Hotline Miami by Denton Games, and since then have made a name for themselves publishing an eclectic mix of very high-quality games, including Loof Trousers, Titan Souls, Downwell, Hatoful Boyfriend, the pigeon dating simulator. And there's like Broforce, The Messenger, a ton of different Serious Sam titles, and just a ton of other stuff as well.
Yeah, I was going through the website recently, and I've seen the name Devolver Digital on a lot of games, but I'm just surprised at they're all over the place. I mean, they're really probably one of the biggest indie devs right now.
Right, they're producing a lot of really hot titles, and usually when you see that name,
it's going to be a good quality.
Game. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a good game. So it's pretty awesome that Dropsy is it's in good hands with Devolver Digital as far as a publisher goes. I think that's pretty awesome. It's got to be kind of humbling to be part of that kind of list of amazing published titles.
So Dropsy was developed by Jay's company Tendershoot and A Jolly Corpse, who made the games Wiv and Keep, Smashbox, and of course Dropsy. And Jolly Corpse is the three-man team of Jesse Bull, Bo Langston, and Dave Walton. What can you tell us about your company and A Jolly Corpse?
So my company is like just me. It's just like, I guess, a pseudonym.
Tendershoot, what does that mean?
It's from the Bible. Probably not surprisingly to anyone who knows my music or anything, but it's about how basically it's like a prophecy about how Jesus was going to come up like a tender shoot in dry ground, like a meek little unassuming small little plant that comes up. And I like the idea of the gentleness behind it, and yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That's where that's from. Yep.
That's pretty cool.
But what was the question?
Oh, yeah. So I know that you mentioned that you worked with A Jolly Corpse to help finish the game. So yeah.
So A Jolly Corpse, Bo didn't work with us, but David was the programmer, and Jesse Bull did most of the NPCs were his, and they both worked on puzzles with me because what I had originally probably wasn't very good game design. There were these huge spreadsheets. It was more lore than it was game design.
Was this your first game?
Yeah, my first big game. I'd made like probably 30 or 40 games before this, but they were all small, like from when I was 12 or 13 in these like little communities and stuff. But yeah, this is my first big game, and I also was going through a bit of a hippy dippy phase where like I kind of wanted to jettison like traditional puzzles. It was, for lack of a better term, Dropsy would have been a little bit more of a walking simulator than it ended up being, but I'm kind of thankful that they didn't like trash my ideas, but we collaborated and it ended up probably 80% normal adventure game in terms of gameplay. But they are really good designers. And
so how did you get in contact with them? Did you know them previously?
I knew them when I was a kid. They were in this click and play community also when we were kids. Also in that community was Derek Yu, who did Spelunky and some of these other people. He made a game called Eternal Daughter back then in 2003 or 4, which is just amazing. But anyway, it blew my like little kid mind. But anyway, I knew the David and Jesse from way back then. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk about Dropsy a little bit. It's got a really interesting backstory. Jay, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here or kind of elaborate on some of the details. But I read that the idea came to fruition on the Something Awful forums back in 2008 as kind of like this choose your own adventure game. People would chime in with ideas they had for different choices the player could take kind of throughout the story.
Yeah, okay. So Dropsy, the sprite that ended up being reused, he was a boss for like a zombie shooty game in 2004 that I made. So I was like, I don't know, 16. I can't do math, something like that. I was 16, and there were too many bugs, so I never finished it. But I reused that sprite. That I always liked it. The clown. He was evil back then, of course, because that's you know.
That's what you do.
But anyway,
Yeah.
He was a boss. So I repurposed him and made a MS Paint sort of. It was done in MS Paint, like a thread on Something Awful. A forum game, choose your own adventure thing, and I posted a panel, and then people would tell me what to do, and it was mostly like at the beginning I was maybe the first 2 or 3 pages I was just taking their suggestions and making stuff up, but then I started, so they sort of shaped him in a way, like they wanted him to like hug everything, and that really was through their suggestions that he became very huggy. Of course, Something Awful was very crude, and I've grown a lot as a person since I've posted there a lot. But so some of their suggestions were not very, very kind ones or whatever, but that definitely shaped Dropsy. But as the thread progressed, then I started planning the story, and then all I would do is like put something in a panel that is interesting, because I knew someone would say, oh, check out that one interesting thing in this panel that you drew, and then I could just guide the story that way. Right. So like there would be a dumpster and then nothing else in the next scene, and then I knew someone would say, look in the dumpster. So I just like planned it that way, and made an actual story out of the thread. A lot of those threads end in like people like them making you urinate on everything, and just they get really bad, but I wanted it to be a little bit, take it in a nicer direction. Yeah.
I'm glad you took it in a different direction.
The internet is a very foul place.
Yeah. And Something Awful, of course. I was a member even back then.
Yeah.
So you came up with, you wanted to make a game, and then you decided to get a Kickstarter going, a campaign going for it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in 2011, I did a campaign for $225 to fund Dropsy, and that was just for the software, because I was just thinking, okay, I'll just slowly work on this as I go along. But my skills were not, even after learning and trying a couple years. I just wasn't able to pull that off on my own with that software, which that software is Multimedia Fusion, which is the same software as the Click and Play, aforementioned Click and Play software. It's just the next in the lineage of it or whatever.
So as the Kickstarter campaign kind of kept rolling, at what process did you bring Chris in? Maybe Chris, you can chime in here.
Well, I think there were actually a few Kickstarters, right? I mean, there was the initial one for like $200, and then there was another one a while after that that was a little bit bigger, and that one didn't succeed.
Yeah, in mid 2013. Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally there was the one that did succeed and kind of led to the game. And I think maybe at the early stages or middle stages of that final successful larger scale Kickstarter was when Jay got in touch with me, and I think for me, Jay was talking earlier about the Something Awful forums and thinking things always going into a crude or grotesque direction. And I think one of the things that I really loved about working on this game on a larger scale was its kindness and its sweetness.
It's like a big fluffy teddy bear child.
Yeah, I see everybody saying that, because there are some dark elements to the game, but everybody's like, it's so sincere, it's so sweet, and you don't expect that.
And that's something that I honestly find that's just missing, like, everywhere. One of the interesting sort of side notes for me through this whole process, and I've talked to Jay about this a little bit, was that the company Nicalis that put out Night Sky that I'd done the soundtrack for, around the time of the Kickstarter for Dropsy, they'd contacted me about doing the soundtrack for The Binding of Isaac.
Oh,
wow.
And I played the game a few times, and I was like, I hate this game. I don't like anything about it. And they were like, well, get back to us in a week. And I played it a week later, and I was like, I like it even less, and the thing is, like, obviously that game's, huge, successful enterprise, and I'm sure everybody's bought like mansions from the proceeds. But for me, like, I just knew that, like, the vibe of that game is so totally the opposite of what Dropsy is. And if you have to spend like months and months working on something, like, I'm very sensitive to kind of the environment and the spirit of the music and the aesthetics of the game. I was well, Dropsy is the thing that I want to spend my time working on. And I couldn't have been more proud of like how that turned out.
I offered him peanuts too. Like, I remember the Facebook chat where you're like, well, how much were you thinking with your budget? And what I know now of how much game soundtracks cost, I would have been very embarrassed at the time to tell you the number I told you. But yeah.
That's funny.
Well, it came together really well, and that's actually a great opportunity to transition to another piece of music.
We have a track here. This is actually a favorite of ours. It's called In the Court of the Junkyard King. This is composed by Chris Schlarb, and it's a phenomenal track, super laid back. Why don't we take a listen to that, and we'll be right back.
So good.
That's good.
All right, that was In the Court of the Junkyard King, composed by Chris Schlarb for Dropsy. I thought this track is incredible. I love listening to this. It's got a very, and maybe this is a great question to ask. It has this very, kind of almost like it's playing on a record, kind of this ambient like noise, almost like the scratching of a needle kind of in the background.
A little bit analog, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. It makes it feel like some kind of guy cruising around the highway and, in the 80s with his shirt unbuttoned and, the hair blowing, in the wind.
Yeah, in a Cadillac or something, you know.
I love it.
Well, that track, I mean, the whole soundtrack, we cut the whole thing in a day. Literally
wow.
like a 10-hour session. I should say, except for the the Snack Cake Factory stuff, which was like, drum machine and synth based. Everything that's got like instruments on it, we cut that in a single session. I wrote all the music out ahead of time, and then we went into the studio with the, 5-piece, 6-piece band, and we cut like everything that day. There are a few little overdubs here and there, but not much. And as I was just listening to that track, it made me laugh because the two drummers on the soundtrack are in two of like the biggest indie rock bands around. Like that's Tabor Allen from Cherry Glazer on drums, and then Sheridan Riley, who plays in this band called Waves, on the other drum set. So it's just kind of funny how, things work out over a few years' time, and the stuff that everybody goes on to do.
That's awesome. This is a great track, though.
When me and Chris were in the early stages of like talking about how the music should sound and like ideas for it and stuff, I pretty much think I told him to do whatever, but because I just liked his music. But I did send him a weird diagram, which was the world map, with a bunch of like colored sections, and then it was like, this sounds like shoegaze a little bit, or this sounds like a little spaghetti western, or this sounds like working man, like Creedence Clearwater, or like Working Man. And that was the Working Man, like, because it was in the Junkyard. Nice. It's your dad's job, and it was right. When I heard that track, I knew this was gonna be really good. I think that was one of the first ones you sent me, Chris. It might have been the first, other than the main theme.
I can listen to this song all day.
Oh yeah,
this is really good.
Actually, we had both Brian and I got a little bit stuck in this section, and
God,
so there's something about because you have to give some animal a cookie or some
like a
rotten, you have to lead it to the different sides of the screen by putting the snack cakes on the plates. I think you get the little.
Yeah.
And I, normally in a game I'd get a little bit frustrated, but the music was so good that I was like, I just powered through it and had a great time.
I was this close, Chris, without your music to rage quit, but this kept me going.
Well, it's funny you say that because I don't do a ton of video game music, but whenever I do, I really try to kind of preface my work as kind of saying, listen, what I do is kind of different. It's not normal video game music. I don't want to do loop-based music.
Right.
I'm just not interested in that. And in fact, most of the time when I play a game, I'll either turn the music off because it's incessant, it never stops playing, or it's just sort of overwhelming. Sometimes, a lot of sound and audio in games, it's so amateurish, and they just think the more the better. And
right.
Kind of my vibe on every soundtrack I've done is always when we did Night Sky and Dropsy, we kind of instituted a sort of silence in between tracks, so that there were moments where the soundtrack
there was
would
no
breathe.
audio. Yeah.
And they don't loop.
I was gonna say I get that vibe too. There was a few moments where the audio would cut out, and I would be standing around in silence, and I was like, "Yeah, it's kind of a nice transition."
There's just some nature ambient loop, very low when the audio when the that's always playing. But then, the way we did that was each area, similar to how that map had colored sections. Each area has a playlist of 2, 3, 4 songs, and then it'll play those songs, and there's 30 to 90 seconds, I think, of silence in between each track. And then it keeps playing the playlist. So if you leave the area and then you come back, it'll just start the next song on that playlist.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Before you left. So it doesn't feel like... I hate that thing when you're in a game. It can be charming sometimes, but you switch screens to go to a different area, and then you switch back and you just hear the same song intro over and over again. Especially in some Nintendo games, it can be funny because they have these bombastic fills at the beginning, and you're hearing that happen in a very short amount of time.
Every single time, yeah.
Yeah, which is, like I said, it can be charming, but it can also, for an adventure game where you're maybe frustrated, it can be annoying, like you mentioned. And I appreciate Chris's, like, if I would have just done the music, you would have quit the game. But I just can't stop adding layers, and it just sounds like trash after a while. But the puzzle you mentioned, yeah, I'm not really, like, with my games in the next one too, if you ever get stuck, just like immediately get the guide and like then make it to the next part, because I am so not proud of my, like, the puzzles are always my least favorite part of these things. It's like the whole experience, the audio and the visuals and the story are, like, I guess what I care about more, and I'm glad that I work with people who do care about puzzles. But yeah, you can just go ahead and skip through those next time if you play the next game and you get very stuck. So.
All right. So going back over to Chris, you talked about your background a little bit. You were in, the owner of Big Ego Records, or you still are.
Yep.
What is your instrument or instrument by trade?
Mostly guitar. I play a lot of acoustic and electric guitar. And yeah, for like the last 4 or 5 years, I've been making a living just as a producer and studio owner and composer. I do a lot of film soundtracks. I produce like 1 or 2 records a month at the studio. Yeah, my wife and I opened Big Ego about 2.5 years ago. It's a commercial facility in Long Beach. And yeah, I kind of just, I needed it, even if only to work on my stuff, because pretty much everything I do is like a full ensemble of musicians from 3 to 13 people.
Wow.
And we mostly cut everything together live, everybody in a room, at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I love doing. I mean, I'm kind of in a way trying to imprint that on video game soundtracks in a way, because oftentimes when I listen to game music, it's so flat and kind of like smug and kind of like, I always think of like different like creative ghettos, and I always think like, man, like video game music might be like one of the worst, because it's so like self-satisfied by just kind of like genuflecting to like Super Mario Brothers or something, you know what I mean? Like these kind of like
right.
iconic things. And sort of like, imagine if, well, I guess it sort of happens in all kinds of music. Like, people are constantly trying to get like the John Bonham Led Zeppelin drum sound like 40, 50 years later. But kind of what I'm just, this is part of what drew me to Jay, is that his spirit and his attitude about what he's trying to convey in a game is different. And he sort of gave me the latitude to do the same with the music. And I remember at some point early on, Jay was sort of like, yeah, I don't know if you want to do like some FM synthesis. And I was like, no, I don't. I don't know anything about that.
No.
No, I don't.
He caved slightly, but it's not FM. But I was happy with it anyway. So
that's for the snack cake stuff, right?
Yeah, the snack cake stuff.
Right. So, I did want to ask actually what your first thoughts were when Jay approached you to do the soundtrack, and you kind of mentioned it, but you see this game for the first time, and you really like the vibe, you're digging it and everything. But what was the kind of what was your first thought? Like, how am I going to approach this? What was your first kind of thought going in?
Well, I grew up playing all those like classic Sierra and LucasArts point and click games. Like Gabriel Knight's probably one of my favorite games of all time.
You and me both.
Oh, dude, it's still
I love Gabriel Knight.
I mean, the writing. I mean, that's a perfect example, right? Like, you have like nothing compared to the technology of today, but everybody tries to make up for a lack of like writing with like pomp and circumstance. Like, check this out, full 360 degree. It's like, yeah, but tell me a story. Like, that's what make me feel something,
Right.
So I kind of grew up on those games, the Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle and Sam and Max. And so like the opportunity to do like a point and click adventure to do the music was just kind of like, oh man, I've been waiting for this like forever.
Right.
As soon as you said that, I can totally imagine a modern Maniac Mansion having a soundtrack just like this. Like they were going for like punk rock and stuff way back then.
Yep. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the composer on that. Was that Peter Gallagher? I hope
For
I'm
Maniac
not.
Mansion?
Yeah, or some of those early LucasArts games.
There was a bunch.
Yeah, I don't remember which one who it was exactly.
It depends on which game, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking lately? Have you any of you played Thimbleweed Park?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I
I've
did
I've
play a
seen
little
it.
bit,
I haven't
yeah.
played it yet.
The music on that does a little bit of a Dropsy-ish thing in that, I mean, it's definitely recorded with a lot of overdubbing. You can tell it's like kind of a studio-y, like fiddled with kind of recording, but it makes me think of Dropsy because I don't think it loops either. I think it does a similar thing where it ends and then you have a different, like in some way it reminded me of Dropsy's soundtrack just a little bit more than like your average newer adventure game soundtrack might.
Yeah.
I think it was all the tremolo on the guitar a little bit too.
So I wanted to go back and say that I totally agree with you. I mean, the whole goal of this podcast is to surface really great game music. And one of the reasons why I was personally drawn to Dropsy is like, this is something different. This is something special. And, you know, it fits the game really well. And, you know, one of the questions we had were, what are some of the main influences you had coming into this musically? You know, both of you actually, in terms of what you wanted this to sound like.
Jay, I'll let you start.
Okay, I'll keep it pretty short, but like my music's always the same. It's like my music's always like I wish I had a prog rock band, but no one will want to be in one with me, so I just like make my own on my computer with to the best of my ability and which, you know, is somewhat limited, but yeah, and that's mostly like I guess I really enjoy the dynamic nature of that genre where you have loud and soft bits next to each other and crazy bits and accessible bits, and I like the dramatic arc of some of these songs where you almost could liken it to like watching a movie, listening to one of these really long form sweet things or something, where you're like, oh, this is the pretty pastoral part after the crazy, it's like the break after the crazy, like, you
Tornado.
know, complex bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, and a lot of that stuff, as I've learned more about music, it sounds kind of not good anymore to me, but I still like it. Like, even knowing it's not technically good, I still really like it. It's like what I probably listen to the most still. So yeah, my music's just like me trying to have a prog band by myself is what that is.
I love it.
You know, I think the interesting thing is that, you know, something that I find is like lost quite often is that like music, as Jay's sort of talking about this, music is about feelings, right? It's not really about like technology or even like your lack of skill. It's sort of like, does what I'm listening to make me feel something? And
Right.
And I think
Let me tack on to that real quick. This game doesn't have any speech or dialogue or anything that's in, you know, anything intelligible anyway.
Yeah.
And with what you're saying kind of right now, does that kind of shape the way that the music actually turned out?
You know, I think it probably did subconsciously. I was sort of trying to split the difference between like a film score and a like a record, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I knew that you know, in any creative endeavor, you're sort of always working within all of these limitations. So our limitations were like time, money, technology,
Right.
Yeah.
right? Like early on, what I needed were certain parameters, like, okay, I only have enough money to pay musicians for one day in the studio. Okay, well, then I got to write all of these tunes and all these variations ahead of time, and we'll go in and we'll knock them out in different combinations so that it sounds like a lot of stuff when in reality we're kind of like dealing with, you know, maybe 6 or 7 core themes, you know?
Right.
And, you know, kind of jumping into that, we also knew like, well, we don't have like the technology to do some insane adaptive, you know, soundtrack. So if we do 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of music for each area, and we kind of implement this little system where there's silence in between and they're sort of randomized, we can get a lot of mileage out of, like we can get a lot out of a little in a way.
I'd like to add to that a little bit in that it was almost the inverse also of what you were asking. Like, I think Chris finished the music in May of 2014. And at that time, our programmer was having some personal issues, and he left the project. And there was nothing, like, he was like the smart guy who knew how to put it all together, because we switched to Unity. Mm-hmm. So then we kind of had to start over with a Jolly Corpse after that. And most of the art was drawn probably while listening to the soundtrack, because he finished that before I did most of the art. Huh. So I think the soundtrack informed a lot of the locations, especially the red clay area with the dubby reggae dubby music. I drew most of those scenes to that.
We got some of those dub tracks to get into in a minute. This is called "Home Is Where the Pulmonary Artery Is." This is composed by Chris Schlarb, and we'll be back in just a sec.
That was Home Is Where the Pulmonary Artery Is by Chris Schlarb. Now, Jay, you actually sent over an early version of that track, which is just called the Dropsy theme. Chris, you actually kept that one pretty similar to the original version.
Chris made it and sent an iPhone recording of it on his piano. He composed it.
Oh.
And then for the Kickstarter, I made that really OPL sort of FM synthy version for the Kickstarter. So it was Chris's. That was the first thing he wrote.
Oh, okay.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, because we have that original. Why don't we take just a listen to that real quick? Just a second.
Sure.
Okay.
All right, yeah. So that was the original, the early track, or I guess it's not the original, right? It's the second. It's the iteration of the original from the iPhone recorded version of. Now I'm getting confused.
Yeah.
Cool, but it's really interesting to see how that track kind of, evolved or devolved into what made it into the game.
Yeah.
I think at the time. Okay, so this is sort of what was funny. We'd gone into I think maybe I must have bought a Wurlitzer electric piano around that time, and I don't remember which thing I sent to Jay, but maybe I did it on. I used to have a Yamaha CP70 like electric piano, and it kind of in the early days of writing. I'm not a good pianist by any stretch, but I actually wrote, I'd say maybe half of the themes for Dropsy on piano. And for me, a lot of that stuff was just like looking at, artwork that Jay had done, kind of looking at the map. Actually, before we went into the studio, Jay just sent me a bunch of like photographs of different places that he was sort of using as inspiration for the backgrounds. And I literally just printed all that stuff out. And before we would do a take or start recording music for an area, the whole band and I would look at the pictures and the artwork and the background, and I'd like describe to them like, this is where we are in the game. This, or like, here we're in the city. Here we're in the sort of like Junkyard desert area, and it was a really like artistic kind of through line to the whole process. It never felt like it got bogged down by like details or technology, sort of just people like, hey, this is what I feel, this is what I think it should be. And the more stuff I do with video games and in the music business, the harder that is to achieve. It's kind of there's a reason why I think a lot of art and commerce are sometimes like strange bedfellows, but every once in a while a game like, let's say, Witcher 3 comes out and you're like, wow, how did they do it? It's like it's art, it's great storytelling, and a great game design,
Right.
And I kind of feel that way on a small scale about Dropsy, because the team was so small that we just did everything like as personally as possible.
Very intimate, right?
Yes, definitely. And Devolver, to their credit, didn't muddle in any of those affairs,
Mm-hmm.
It was scary how much they didn't muddle. I was like thinking, oh my God, do they still want to publish this, or?
Well,
very hands-off.
maybe that's why they are so successful as a publisher right now. It was because they're giving the creatives an opportunity to kind of do what they want to do and do what they need to do to make something successful. They're just saying, hey, we're leaving it to you guys.
Yeah, when you look at some of their games, there's definitely some things where another publisher would be like, can you actually change this and make it, kind of homogenous?
Right.
Some of their games are really out there, and I think it's really cool that they allow developers just to do their thing and come back to them. And I don't know if they're just coming back with notes for you guys, but it seems like they really gave you a lot of freedom.
Yeah, they did. They sent it out for testing once, and it was a testing, some testing people. I don't know. It was like they were in Poland. It was like a firm that does it, and I don't know if you remember this, Chris. I think I told you, but they had a thing at the top. It was like puzzle, pointing and clicking not fun was the first thing. I think they meant they would rather use a controller. And then also puzzles too hard. Once we put our heads together, we could figure them out, was another. That's literally what the other thing said. The bug testing they did was amazing though.
Yeah.
But I think they normally did not point and click adventures.
Right. And it's hard
yeah.
it's hard to hit, every crowd's going to be different. That might not have been the audience, anyway.
And that's like the problem with, I guess, point and click adventures in general, because everything is, I always say this, but everything is context. Like, if you don't catch this visual cue that I'm sending, or you haven't just seen an object that looks the way I'm drawing it, you have no hope of like solving a certain puzzle, because
right.
there's your necessary knowledge. Whereas
and you might never see it again.
Yeah, and whereas other games, like, you have elements that repeat, and it's almost like matching colors or matching numbers. Like, it clicks in that way. But adventure games are kind of have very arbitrary puzzles just by their nature, But I wanted to go back to something briefly. Chris was saying about not being limited by technology, or like being too sort of concentrated on the technology, or I don't know. Yeah. So one thing I like about Chris though is that he knows, and when I say technology here, I'm meaning like guitar pedals and particular instruments and stuff, I guess. So maybe that's not the same technology, but Chris really knows, like, if you're trying to get a certain sound, he knows what effects to apply and how, the dynamics that you would play with, like how loud you would play. I think it's Chris' second nature to you, a lot of this, like to add spring reverb to the piano, because of course you would. And like when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, there's spring reverb on this piano. If I would have got some other guy, it would have just been a piano. Or like hey, at the studio they were at, they had a real Mellotron, and so our end game tracks have real Mellotron on them, and so I was so excited. He even sent me a phone video of like them playing the Mellotron on some of the end game tracks, and I just like fell out of my chair. It was the best day of my life.
Yeah. Basically, every time I see Jay reply to somebody on Twitter, there's like usually something like, "Yeah, and there's Mellotron on it." or asking the question like,
Yes.
"Hey, did you like that?" "Yeah, there's Mellotron in there." You know?
Dream come true.
Yeah.
Dream come true.
Yeah, it was really good. And it's not, I mean, I think this is partially like when I was 18 years old and, you know, when in my very formative years when my tastes were being made and I was super into like old 70s prog, Mellotron became
Genesis
this.
and King Crimson.
Yeah, that stuff. Mellotron somehow became like it tickles something now for me, you know, because I was that age when I first discovered it. So I don't think that'll ever go away.
Well, to me, that just goes back to emotion, right? It's like it makes you feel something. And I think, you know, there are certain like emotional cues in real performances and in real sounds and in real instruments that are muted if you're using like VSTs or plugins or fake instruments. If you're using an
Couldn't
approximation,
agree with you more.
you know, does that make sense? Like everything on the Dropsy soundtrack, other than the Snack Cake stuff, was like a real piano, a real saxophone, a real double bass, a real acoustic guitar. Like, honestly, for me, it's faster to record all of that stuff with real people than it ever would be for me to create a phony approximation of those things.
I will say I do like a lot of like VST music, but the kind I like is the kind where the person obviously spent like a long time trying to get the dynamics and effect envelopes and everything like just so to where you know they were concentrating on minutia.
I'd rather have like a root canal.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I kind of, in a way, I like it for its. We'll probably be at an impasse here with this, but there's something. Yeah, what you're saying is true though. Like to get the same effect from VSTs is a heck of a lot of work, or even something similar, because you can't just load a patch and just like bang something
Expect
out
it to
and
sound
then
perfect, right?
it sound the same. You don't have the room. You don't have people together. You know, that kind of thing.
I will say there are some people who are incredible at it and have embraced it. Like I think what Rich does, you know, all like his Disaster Piece soundtracks. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't do what he does, and I kind of don't feel like most other people could either. Like he's really like found a unique voice of his own with technology and kind of like making it submit and serve his purposes.
His music is fantastic.
Oh,
but
yeah.
He's not trying to approximate any
Yeah.
real instruments. So he's taken a completely different angle to writing his stuff.
Yeah, I've listened
Which that reminds me, you know, of like I remember reading an interview with Joni Mitchell, and she said one of the reasons that she loved Stevie Wonder's synth playing was because he treated synthesizer as though it was its own instrument and not an approximation of something else. He wasn't trying to make a synth bass sound like a real bass.
Right.
He's saying, "Oh, it's some totally unique sound. Let me explore that." And I think there are a few people that I think that are really good at that. And then I kind of feel like most other folks are just sort of like pale imitations, you know?
Yeah. All right, well, let's go ahead. We got a lot more music to play, so let's jump into our next track. This is called Kierkegaard's Neon Lights, composed by Chris Schlarb.
that was Kierkegaard's Neon Lights by Chris Schlarb.
This is a super mellow track. This is, I put this whole soundtrack on mostly in the evenings because that's when I've had time to listen. And man, this really just makes me melt in my chair.
It works at any time of the day.
So chill, yeah. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I love when you walk in the game when you walk into the city for the first time. That's the one that plays, and it sets the tone so well for that part of the game. I really love that track. I love all the city tracks. They're all pretty chill like that.
Yeah, I was trying to make them sort of like melancholic. I really, there a lot of these tunes are variations. So like with that one, we like slowed the melody down. And I think we changed the timing into like 6 instead of 4. So the notes are kind of like falling in different, relationships to each other. And, changed the arrangement on it. The saxophone, Jeremy Trezona's incredible tenor sax player, so that doesn't hurt. But I think some of the city stuff for me, I was, maybe subliminally thinking of like the great Mike Post, who did like Hill Street Blues and Taxi theme songs. I mean, one of the great like TV theme song composers of all time. And I just always kind of like lament the fact that like TV theme songs now are so generic and boring. And they used to make you want to like commit suicide. Like that's how like, like they made you feel something, right? Like when you hear like the Taxi theme song, I think that was Bob James, and then the Hill Street Blues theme song that Post did, it's like they're depressing, they're sad, they're poignant, they evoke an emotional response. And now everything's just sort of like
I think the Twin Peaks theme does that for me too, and I love it because
I agree.
It's such a long intro sequence too for a TV program, and they just let it play with like these calm visuals. I also, Chris, the theme of this podcast is like everything these days sucks.
This was supposed to be the Hugventure episode.
Yeah.
Is that my vibe? I think that's the tricky thing for me. Is like I always have to have a kind of like point of view on something so that I can respond differently, or else everything kind of like to me just feels the same.
Right.
It's not overwhelmingly negative. I was just being funny.
Jay, I think you were being negative about me being negative. So,
all right, let's talk about Dropsy. Let's talk about the story of the game. Let's move over to the gameplay a little bit. Jay, tell us in your own words the story or the premise of Dropsy.
Okay, so Dropsy is about a being who is this is a great description. Hold on, I'll start over.
Wait, you did make this game, right? I'm just gotta check here.
I made it. Dropsy is about a clown who is not very physically attractive looking to most people. I guess that would be an understatement. And he is but he has a heart of gold. So he Dropsy is a game in which you play as a character where everyone in the world doesn't like you at the beginning, which I would say is a subversion of most games where you're usually some sort of
outcast or
or like an aspirational type of person, like a strong person or a very smart or powerful person, like any human metric of power. Usually the video game hero is really good at one of those things: intelligence, magic, any something.
Right.
But Dropsy I like as a protagonist because he doesn't have any immediate strengths, I guess. And most people, when they play, think a shoe is gonna drop pretty, a short way into the game, where you open Dropsy's shed and then there's dead people in there, or something like that. So, and I would say that that's a subversion, but now that I think about it, in most games, like most of the other characters, you kill them, so they don't like you either, probably. But Dropsy is one in what, not other adventure games though, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, that's the.
It's really hard game to describe if you've never experienced it. And even me going in, Gene actually told me about the game, and he's like, "Man, you got to try this out." And I didn't know anything that I was getting myself into. And then after I want to say about 30 minutes in, then I'm like, I get it now. The game itself is a point and click adventure similar to any of the old LucasArts or Sierra games from the mid 90s. You control the main character Dropsy, this Jay was saying, this kind of slightly grotesque but very sweet clown character that has no fingers and gets like all goofy and
noodly arms. Yeah, makes all sorts of sounds. And we were just about to get to it, but the core mechanic of Dropsy is basically that you go around and hug people. And it's kind of an odd thing at first,
right.
But it's very it's a very touching thing. People are having a bad day, you go up and hug them, and sometimes it doesn't even have to do with the puzzle. It's just to make them feel a little bit better. And I love that there's this running list of all of the people and things that you've hugged throughout the game back in your tent. You could just see these like cartoon drawings of every character that you've encountered. And there's also the interactions with your animal buddies, where you get a dog, a mouse, and a bird, and they have their own unique actions, and you switch between them, to get the hard to reach places or have them pick up or retrieve things. And it's pretty non-linear. There's a big map area. You've alluded to it a few times. You can go back and forth. Later on, you get a clown car. You can fast travel. But there's this sense that you were thinking a lot about the lore and the setting, like you mentioned. And I'm just curious how much of that was there from the beginning and sort of what came along later on down the road.
So yeah, that was the very first thing. The first thing was figuring out what Dropsy was, because in the thread, I didn't really care about that question in the old Something Awful game, because it was just fun. Right. He was a clown. But because of the nature of his character, he resembles someone who might have autism, and I had to figure out how to make a game about a person like that and do it in a gentle, good way, So it was hard. So a lot of the lore and the plot came when I was trying to decide exactly who and what Dropsy was. Where did he come from? Why can't he talk? Or, talk like other people talk? Why does he look so different physiologically, I guess? And then, so I made up a little story for him, and I started making up a world, and initially the little areas were a bit disparate, and they were just combinations of ideas that I thought were interesting, like the Red Clay Village, which is our internal name for it, but it's where these it's almost a combination of Norse mythology and Rastafarianism and cargo cults a little bit.
I love that. I love that area.
Yeah, me too.
And it's a little bit, not a spoiler because there's not enough probably in the game to extrapolate, but these people in generations past witnessed the filming of a vampire film, and there was photographs of it, and this was at the same time as a sort of upheaval was happening with them. They were sort of being oppressed by another force in this world who were sort of using them for cheap labor and stuff, this group of people, and I think they're an indigenous people, and so they misunderstood the filming of this movie, though. They thought it was a miraculous event. It was a vampire movie.
Wow, there's way more to that than I ever expected.
It was Thor versus the vampires.
Wow.
and so you can find little bits about this, but everything didn't make it in that would have explained it. So that's why I'm saying it here, because no one would ever know otherwise. But yeah, that, and there were a lot of little things like that. The Junkyard guy, everyone has their own little thing that I ended up tying together into a story where Dropsy has to visit everyone.
Yeah, you really get a sense that there's a little bit more to every character, even if you don't see all of it.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting that we talked about a little bit earlier? There's no actual dialogue in this game. Everything's described with very simple pictures, and sometimes they don't even make like a very first impression on you. You have to really think about it. Like money is burning, and there's like this rock, and then like somebody is upset. What does that mean? And you have to like put these very kind of simplistic, I guess maybe this is how Dropsy is interpreting the world around him. Maybe that's what it is. And so you're almost like living through Dropsy through this game. You get to see everything from his perspective.
Yeah, the speech bubbles were a part of that, like because of who Dropsy is, and he can't communicate well. And he can't understand people well, which was a thing from the Something Awful thread. He frequently sort of didn't catch cues and stuff. So in this, yeah, that's why we did the speech bubbles originally, is for that reason. They became quite difficult to, like, as you mentioned,
decipher.
Yeah, they became pretty difficult because we have a 30 by 22 pixel area in which to like communicate things, and some of these things are things you must understand to progress, you know. Right. So we had to do a lot of iteration on those little icons, but that's why, because it kind of simulates being Dropsy. And we originally had a little plan for, by we I mean I, but the guys helped me realize that this would have been a mess, for almost a little dialogue system, and you could react by clicking an emotion, like a Dropsy face where he was happy, sad, whatever, and then you could get more icons after that. But for a few reasons that just it wouldn't have worked as well as it sounds like it might have. But,
yeah. Well, I think the choices that you guys made, maybe it might come off a little bit difficult in some areas at me as a player, when I figure it out and I connect the dots, it's really rewarding, and I really enjoyed that kind of aspect of this title. Yeah, and
that's what we were hoping. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, well, somebody actually brought this up in our Discord channel, and I really liked it. The language cipher also contributes to that feeling of just alienation and like, I can't understand what's going on as the player or as Dropsy, and I think it really works in conjunction with this other stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's just a direct to English sort of cipher glyph language thing, but that's why we did that too, because it would feel strange to leave out understanding NPC dialogue but have readable signs. Just in my brain, it kind of was incongruent. Right. And then at the end, it helped us because zero localization at all happens needed to happen in the game, which is very expensive. Nice. So I wasn't thinking about that at the time, but it
worked
helped
out to your benefit.
Yeah, it helped.
Well, let's get into some more music. We still got some more tracks to play, so we're going to listen to a track called Mothersbaugh on the Beach, and this was, again, composed by Chris Schlarb, and we'll be right back.
That was Mothersbaugh on the Beach by Chris Schlarb for Dropsy.
This is another really chill track. It's got that kind of stoner rock kind of vibe going on. This is another one of those tracks that I can have on in the evening and just kind of melt away and just listen to and space out. And again, really awesome kind of lo-fi-ish sound with the that kind of record kind of hum in the background.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Really nice use of the sax in there too. It's the second half of the piece is just really beautiful.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, that one, each section of the game sort of, I tried to put together a kind of a unique arrangement of instruments, and doing the beach section was a lot of fun. I still don't know that, I don't think that entire section of the game has even been released yet, but I think that's coming in an update still, yet undetermined point in the future. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny how all that stuff worked out. We cut it all in the same day, knowing here are all the different areas that we have to write music for. So that one was almost kind of turned out like some weird Devo meets Dick Dale kind of thing.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, no, it's a really great track. I know we don't have a lot of time left with you, Chris. I kind of want to talk to you before you have to get going here. What are your plans as far as moving forward and putting out, new albums, new releases? Do you have anything in the works currently?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always working on stuff. I'm signed to this record label called Joyful Noise Recordings. They put out the Dropsy soundtrack on vinyl. And, I've got a group called Psychic Temple, which is my own like singer-songwriter or, jazz music or whatever I want it to be for whatever occasion arises.
Nice.
But yeah, and then, my wife and I have our studio, Big Ego, and then we also have a record label that goes with that. We've got 2 records coming out in October. We put out 2 records in January. We'll have another 4 records scheduled to come out in 2019. We do kind of like a $100 a year subscription series where, I produce every record. We do them at our studio. So for like, $25 a record or so, you get 4 records throughout the year from like an actual independent studio and record label.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, I've done a few more video game soundtracks, here and there. I've done a few things with a guy named Connor McCann. He put out a really interesting game called Rotor that was for sort of like a game jam-ish sort of thing that happened in Austin last year. I was really proud of how that soundtrack turned out, and Jay and I are, working on things here and there. So somebody was just asking me the other day about additional Dropsy things that are in the game but weren't released on the vinyl soundtrack. So I kind of was thinking that maybe we should do like a 7-inch or something to put out the remaining music.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
So
nice.
maybe we can figure that out if there ends up, being like a port of the game or the update.
Too.
Right. Exactly.
Well, you guys definitely make a special team. This game, the way it turned out with all the aesthetics, the gameplay, and the music combined, just was a great recipe for success. And I think that if people haven't played it, they're in for a real treat. It's not a very long game. You don't have to 40 hours of your life to playing this title. You can beat it in 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, if you know what you're doing, it'll
If
probably
you're smart.
take I think it took me like 4 or 5 hours, but it was still like a really enjoyable journey, and it really stuck with me. Like I spread the love of Dropsy to everybody.
Aww.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we hope that Chris, you continue to work with Jay in the future, and whatever comes out next, we hope that you're included on that soundtrack as well.
Yeah, well, keep bugging Jay that after Hypnospace comes out, that we end up working on this Moonlight Arms game that we've been cooking up for a few years. So
Oh man, that would be a cool.
I'm trying to publicly shame Jay into working on this project with me because I don't want to do it with anybody else.
I really
Nice.
want to. Oh
Nice.
man,
Well, let's make it happen.
You guys, this game, like in terms of soundtrack, I don't think there would be anything like it. I can't say anything about it, can I?
I mean, if it gets people excited about it and forces us to do it, be my guest.
So,
Please, by all means.
Yeah.
briefly, I just want to say you have a radio in the game, and the game is set over a finite amount of time. It's almost like maybe Groundhog's Day type thing.
Yep.
And you have a radio you can listen to, and you can switch to different stations, and you use the audio. I think it's very heavy on using hintage from, or keeping track of time via like the baseball game on this one station, or
Exactly.
like this commercial going on another station, and the amount of like fun audio stuff that would go into that is just very exciting to me.
That sounds really awesome. That's really awesome. Instead of a big fat, grotesque Dropsy, it's a big fat grotesque Bill Murray as the main character.
It's actually a little like it's a little teenage boy. The whole game is centered inside of like an apartment complex, and we've kind of been workshopping it for a while. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed, because as you guys mentioned with Dropsy, like honestly, working with Jay to me doesn't feel like work at all. I feel
Well,
like
that's the best.
we have a similar approach to humanity and aesthetics, and I think one of the things that I particularly love about Jay and his work is that sort of his thoughtfulness and his kind of like desire for something better is kind of always apparent to me. And I think Dropsy is a perfect example where the sort of like the point of the game is trying to like make this virtual world a better place, and the hope that maybe that actually ignites something in like the human beings playing it, and would have some sort of like positive impact that would like resonate after you're done playing the game. And I think that's kind of like the goal of a lot of like art, and to be involved in that for me is it's like we don't have to explain this to each other. Like,
that's really cool to hear you say, though. I like hearing you say that. It's like it's important to me though that like if I make a thing, I don't want it to even possibly like someone to finish the thing or finish experiencing the thing, and then because of it go hurt someone, or even like and not even that, more in a proactive way. Like I would, if I didn't make a thing that could possibly put someone in a better place than they were before they experienced it, not that it's going to do that for everyone, or that it's like this moving amazing work every time, or that it needs to be, but like it has to at the bare minimum have like just a slightly upwards
positive
positive effect a little bit, or I couldn't live putting that out there. Like I have fun playing games where you shoot dudes and shoot each other and stuff, but like for me, like I just couldn't do that, like make it, because with how much of that like is in real life, like I couldn't risk like just the idea that maybe, not that video games cause it, but maybe the person who went out and hurt a bunch of people just were doing it in my creation. Like it would just ruin me.
Right.
So yeah.
And there's plenty of AAA titles, putting out those kind of games anyway. So there's that's already covered. You don't need to reinvent that.
There are not enough games.
Let's do something else.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are not enough games where being sensitive and compassionate is like how you get through life in the world.
Right.
That's also the hardest thing to convey, right? Like, it's so easy to convey anger. It's so difficult to convey kindness. It's harder to do, which is why people don't do it.
Right.
Because it can seem, I think it seems like cheese ball. Like there's not a good way to do that in a video game where it doesn't feel disingenuous or weird.
Well, honestly, when I first read the title of the game, the Hugventure, I was like, oh man, is this going to be just some corny kind of thing? And it really wasn't. I think we do see that kind of, when things are goofy or silly like that, it's kind of blown out of proportions to where it doesn't have the same sentiment, I guess. And Dropsy is very different on that count.
Yeah, I think we accomplished our goal there. So, yep.
Yeah, I'm still proud of it.
We're coming up on our last couple of tracks. We're going to play Last of the Lonely Tumbleweeds by Chris Schlarb.
Oh, yeah. I like this one a lot.
That was Last of the Lonely Tumbleweeds by Chris Schlarb.
This is another mellow, just relaxing, feel-good track.
So much of the soundtrack has this sense of nostalgia and longing, but not in a cheesy way like, you were mentioning, referencing like old games, but it just feels like simpler times. And I just love that about this whole soundtrack.
Yeah, like one of the things that stands out to me about that tune in particular is that I don't play slide guitar very often, and I think that's got some like slide acoustic on it. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, when I cut that, I didn't even have a slide, so I used like a bottle to play I just like picked up like a glass bottle, and I was like, okay, well, see how this goes. But for me in general, a lot of the music that I work on, I think I'm always concerned about space and making sure that there's plenty of it, because so much of what I hear around me is just a kind of cacophonous, and I can usually zero in on like whether or not I think somebody knows what they're doing by how much organized space is in their work. And I think one of the nice things about, this tune in particular is that everything kind of like moves out of the way for that kind of like lonesome, slide acoustic guitar sound.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, I might be wrong, but I think there was like an electric guitar playing the chords that I muted, and then I played an acoustic guitar playing the same chords, but you can still hear the ghost of the electric.
That's rad.
Because I cut that with the band, and then I like muted it and then kind of like overdubbed an acoustic. So you almost get like an electric reverb from an acoustic guitar, which is kind of a cool little,
wow,
like Easter egg or something.
Yeah, we'll have to re-listen for that now. Awesome. Well, hey, Chris, we know you got to go. You got to run. Jay's going to stick around with us for a few minutes, but Chris, want to say thank you so much. Had a great time chatting with you about your composition for Dropsy and your insight on just the process and your kind of experience working with Jay.
Yeah, we learned so much. Games like this just don't come around very often, and I'm just glad we got the opportunity to talk to both of you.
Yeah, well, thank you guys very much. I had a pleasure.
Awesome. And we'll put a link in the show notes to your Bandcamp page and where people can find some of your music.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris.
Take it
You
easy.
got it.
Bye, Chris.
Hi, Jay.
All right. So, Jay, why don't we move into our next track? The track we got is called 144 Gears Marching in 14/4.
That was 144 Gears Marching in 14/4 by Chris Schlarb.
This is an interesting one. Very different than everything else we've heard at this point.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like what you were aiming for with more of the FM kind of warbly, kind of 90s computery sound that you were talking about.
Yeah, that was. He messaged me and said when he recorded that, because we had these sort of factory areas and sort of espionage sections and secret labs and stuff like that, and they're a little colder and a little more, I don't know, metallic, and so that was both him doing those because we didn't have tracks for those yet, and trying to fulfill my request for FM synthesis, which I think it was mostly not FM, but it sounded great to me. And I liked, even though it was still electronic, it was very sparse. There's a lot of room in it still, not a lot of layers going on. I think it's just a drum machine and a synth, really. Yeah.
Yeah, we love the track. That's why we wanted it in. But it is very different than everything we've heard at this point. And very different. It kind of stands out in the album as just an odd man out.
It's really one of the few tracks that sounds like this. And you're right. It does have a big contrast. A lot of the outdoor or sort of more, I guess you would, organic areas have the live instruments. And you get this, which feels very, a little oppressive, maybe?
Abrasive,
yeah.
oppressive, yeah.
Yeah, it was nice that the spoilers, the bad people's areas had this consistency, and that their music was mostly electronic. I think I only did one track of that, and that was the theme park. The theme when you're walking around in the little courtyard of the theme park they're building.
Right.
But that's definitely FM synthesis. But it all has that a bit of a colder feeling to it. Right. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and change the pace a little bit and move over from this, kind of abrasive kind of sound over to more reggae dub style track with White Dub in Psychic Temple. And this is composed again by Chris Schlarb. We'll be right back. right, so that was White Dub in the Psychic Temple, composed by Chris Schlarb for Dropsy. Very different than the last track. This is super chill. This is way awesome. Like, nice kind of reminds me of Chris from Long Beach. But this kind of reminds me of like Long Beach Dub All Stars or something like that. The successor to Sublime and stuff, and kind of has that vibe to me.
Yeah, for sure. And on my my little map I sent him, dub, that area was dub, is what I wrote in there. And I think I said shoegaze too, which it does have quite a bit of dub has reverb up the butt anyway, but
yeah.
So yeah, that was the area I was talking about with the sort of cargo culty folks for that area. And one thing that I like about that is a few of the tracks he ran through an Echoplex or a Roland Space Echo. I don't remember which, but he ran through Space Echo, a tape echo, and he turned the knobs and it gets pretty loud later on, like the Space Echo effects and stuff
Right.
I think this is one of my favorite tracks in the album. I come back to this one a lot, and in the Court of the Junkyard King.
I would totally agree with you.
And I love that there's this kind of aspect of this track in particular where you have that dub underpinning, but the top, the sax and the melodies, it's very Dropsy. And but it's not as much of like a reuse of a theme like you do with some of the other tracks. It's kind of its own thing, but it still fits in really well.
Right.
Yeah, this theme is an Easter eggy callback to an album of Chris Schlarb, Psychic Temple album of his, and it's a take on the main melody is a take on one of those themes from that album. And the band, the Dropsy band, had already, I think they already performed on that album, so they already knew it. So it was natural. They already had their stuff set up.
That makes sense.
And they're like, hey, let's do a take on, like a dubby take on that theme. And it fits really well. It does sound very Dropsy. Bits of it, there's some jazz thing that connects them all that I can't explain. Maybe if I looked at the notes. But yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, it definitely has a bit more of a polished jam sound than some of the other tracks, but it works really well.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so we're kind of wrapping up here. I want to talk about the reception of Dropsy. I hadn't even heard about it until Gene brought it up about May. He's like, hey, dude, have you played Dropsy? And I was like, no, I haven't heard of it. And he's like, go buy it. It's on sale right now. And so I purchased it, and I kind of sat on it for a few months, and I was like, I'll get to it. This weird clown, okay, whatever. When I played it, I was blown away. I really was. I was super skeptical. I really was, and I really completely changed. I flipped a full 180 and fell in love with the game. Everything about it. People, like, looking at like YouTube comments or reviews, people are praising it, and they said it's very sincere, very heartfelt, and it's just, it invokes all of these, for it, as grotesque as it may look, it's kind of got this Ren and Stimpy vibe every now and then, some kind of Rocco's Modern Life, kind of that thing going on, maybe even a little SpongeBob or something there. It's kind of seen as by the whole as a very heartfelt game, and I was wondering what the responses that you've gotten about the game, how have those kind of shaped your maybe moving forward to the next game you work on?
Yeah, that's a big thing that consumed my thoughts for a long time, because like before release, but getting towards the end of release when we were starting to market it, a lot of the reaction, and I don't know if this is because of the way like Devolver angled it, or if it's just when people see it, that's what they see. Is like, oh, here's this creepy game where you hug children and scare them, and like, and I have myself to blame a little bit, because like we front loaded it with like farts and like pee jokes and stuff, because
that'll do it.
Yeah. Because we had a few like internal ideas of like, well, it's an adventure game. It's not like gonna be super exciting to stream. So we need to put some stuff in there. Like, I don't know how intentional this was. It's halfway that we just thought farts are funny, but like we definitely put some things like the scare in the mirror if you click the mirror 3 times, then you see like a 3D pre-rendered version of Dropsy. That's how he sees himself, I guess.
I gotta go do it now.
Well, that's what's weird is like in the trailer, it's played as like, oh, it's one of these Ren and Stimpy close-up scare moments. But in the game, Dropsy's like, oh, he's kind of scared of his own reflection. It's like it's meant to be like he's not even really happy with the way he looks.
You did a really good job of Dropsy's voice there, Gene. By the way.
Yeah, Dropsy is me with like a crappy VST effect on my voice. But formant shifted down a little bit. But anyway, yeah. We were partially to blame for that. But it made me a little sad because I saw so many tweets of like some people who I like in the industry really respect, who were just like very dismissive. They're like, oh, farty Ren and Stimpy P game, I'm not gonna touch that with a 1,000-foot pole or whatever. And I was like, no, these are the people that would like it and like would probably they're the people who I think would most appreciate what it's trying to say. But maybe it was a good thing because maybe people who most need to hear the message are also the most attracted to the farty thing. I don't know.
Well, like I was saying, I was right there alongside of those people, and I was, kind of saw it and was a little dismissive because it didn't, the fart jokes and stuff. It's not really my jam.
Yeah.
And so when Gene was showing me this, I was like, oh boy, okay. And then, like I said, sure enough, now I'm totally sold.
I have to say, everybody that I've shown this to, when they cross the threshold, they really love it. Like my wife doesn't play a lot of games, but like. We had I think about a week or so that we were playing this together on the big TV, and she would look forward to it. Like, I want to, play more Dropsy, and that like never happens. Right. She'll play like a puzzle game or something. Yeah. So, and she has very fond memories of it, and just as a quick thing, she wanted to say thank you, and she really loved the game, and
that's really
I've just
good to hear, Neato.
Yeah, so just know that if people actually get in, they actually start the game up and play for a few minutes. I think everybody I've talked to has really loved it. And, just the comments across the board have been extremely positive. And again, that thing about sincerity, like everybody from the music to just the NPCs, the interactions, everybody's like, you said, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, and it never happens. It's a sweet game with some slightly dark moments.
Right.
Yeah, at the end there's a thing, but it's not what people expect, and it's like, it's not, Dropsy is never, it's not a big spoiler to say he's never a bad dude. So. But that was a thing that stressed me out for sure for a while. Like, and Undertale came out a week or two after Dropsy, and not that point and click adventures have much potential for like that's another thing, is I think that there's not a lot of overlap between the audience who like farty. I keep saying farty. I guess that's a new word to describe this. Ren and Stimpy, like, blah, twisted. Right, I don't know. There's not a lot of overlap between that kind of person and a person who would play a slow point and click adventure. So I think once they realize what genre it is, like I was at a game convention, and this made me really sad. And there was a game. It was in the Devolver booth, and there was a game next to ours that had a controller, but they shared the same table, and we had a keyboard and mouse in front of our game, but the controller was kind of in front of our game, so the person sat there and they picked up the controller and tried to like move Dropsy, even though it was for the game next to ours, and they realized they looked down and they like moved the mouse and realized the kind of game it was, and then they left. And I was like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
Well,
they're missing out. They're missing out.
You're not always going to get everybody, but the people that do are definitely going to be, they're in it for the long haul. So we wanted to know, are there any future plans for Dropsy? Maybe a sequel, possibly?
Yeah. Yeah, there are. So
okay, it didn't take too hard to get it out of you.
So we've had ideas for a sequel like since before the game was done, and like we don't know. What we'd really like to do is make a direct sequel that continues the story, because there's a pretty amusing and interesting concept for that, and we would also continue the villain we were thinking about you switch back and forth between Dropsy and playing as the villain from the first game, and expanding more on him. But
I haven't beaten it yet, so no spoilers.
Oh, okay.
I'm like right at the end.
You've been very good about not giving anything away, so keep it that way just for
Okay,
the next 10 minutes.
Gene told me I'm like 10 minutes away from beating the game.
Oh yeah. The end comes pretty quickly if you're good at adventure games. So we've been debating like what to do about that, but we are working on a Switch version. I say we're working on it, but we're waiting for one guy to be sent his dev kit. But me and Jesse have been adding back in some content that was cut. Like there's some beach areas that just didn't make it into the game. And so there's a few new NPCs and some new stuff that fills in a little bit of lore that you couldn't quite get from the original release. Most of this was planned, but we couldn't make it by release. So
That makes sense.
This is like the actual one I wanted to make originally is what it'll be. And there's a karaoke part too, which should be fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So can you tell us about your upcoming game, Hypnospace Outlaw?
That's a hard one to describe too. It's an alternate reality internet simulator set in sort of a fake 1999, though it's really a 1999 that combines a lot of things from the entire 90s. Like there's a lot of this global village sort of tech optimism-y thing where with like a lot of appropriated like tribal designs, stuff like that. And that's from the early 90s. And then there's a lot of like sort of late 90s like new metal, like Matrix, like, you know, all of that.
Sounds like my jam.
Yeah.
Gotta join the web ring to get on that game.
Yes. And, you know, you browse this internet system and you play as sort of a volunteer moderator. You just moderate in exchange for fake currency that you can just spend on downloads. You go through these GeoCities looking websites with like rotating animated GIFs or GIFs or whatever you say. And you
There's only one right way to say it.
well, let's
I'm not going to argue that.
Well,
I was waiting for Gene to perk up and just...
My favorite podcasts that I love, I'll say it the way I think is wrong, so it's fine. I'm fine with it now. But yeah, so that's what that is. You browse this enormous fake internet, and there's a buttload of music in this game. There's, I think right now, 3 hours of original music, and Chris Schlarb did get the band back together, and I'm just gonna say this, there's a psych rock / prog fake 70s psych rock prog band called Clifta that I wrote into the Hypnospace lore and story. So he got the band together and like tried his best to approximate the different eras of an old like psych / prog band. And so there's a few songs from their early 70s records that everyone likes, and they're both 10 minutes long, which is really cool.
That's incredible.
That's
and
awesome.
then there's an 80s song of theirs, which is like when they fell from everyone's grace and were going for a little bit of a poppier sound. And then there's the lead singer's like solo like meltdown project where it's just not that good, but he likes it and diehard fans like it. So it's so cool what he did for that project. And he did not charge me a whole lot of money because I didn't have a lot. So yeah, and there's a new metal song in there. It's very accurate. It sounds just like Linkin Park. So lots of fun, like 96 kbps MP3s in there and stuff.
Well, you sold me on the game. I think we're both of the same. We're all of the same era, actually.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Do we have a release date for Hypnospace Outlaw?
January is when that's going to come out. Yep.
Nice. And platform?
PC, Mac, and Linux. We'd really like to port it, and we will. to
We got that Switch dev kit on the
console.
way, so
Yeah, we will if it sells enough on PC, but we're kind of stuck in a way that like we can't localize it. Too many words and too many on purpose misspellings, and like
Right.
it would
Oh,
just
yeah,
be
yeah.
a big mess and very expensive. So it can only be English, so that kind of limits the audience, which might limit sales. Hopefully not. And yeah, but if we sell enough, we'll definitely port it because I want everything to be on God's perfect console. So,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, moving back over to Drops, we got another track. It's kind of like our second to last track. The track's called Theme Park. And this was composed by Jay Tholen for the Dropsy Eternal Hug EP. This is a very interesting track, so let's take a listen to that and we'll be right back.
All right, that was Theme Park by Jay Tholen from Dropsy.
I have so much fun listening to it. The different changes and kind of, speed up and slow downs with the time is just, I mean, it's not really the time. It's like the time signature kind of switches up, right?
Yeah, a
I
little
think
bit. There's
section
some
in
cut
there.
time in there.
Yeah. So it's a really fun track, and I think it keeps kind of like this kind of evolving feeling with like the momentum of the entire track.
Yeah, it's a really interesting interplay. The foreground, the sort of is the percussion, and the background you kind of have this sort of rolling chord melody thing, and it's one is the percussion's really out in your face, but it's also a very soothing track. When you hear it in the game, it's sort of in the background when you're walking around this like circus tent as they're building up for the show, but it works really well there.
Thanks. Yeah, that one I made very, very early on. I think it was on that early tracks album too, and that was like a theme that I was gonna play when Dropsy first leaves this tent and like hits the road to go on his adventure or something. I didn't end up sending that to Chris or anything because I just wanted him to come up with like whatever he was gonna come up with. But we got towards
His own
the
take
end.
on it, yeah.
What's that?
Oh, I just said his own take on it, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to confine him to like something I made because then he might not be into it and then it'll mess with, it's just, I wanted him to do the whole thing however he wanted. So we got towards the end of development and I realized I didn't have anything suitable for this theme park area because the electronic tracks he did were really good, but they had some suspense to them and they were it needed to feel a little happier, like they were going for a theme park thing. So I listened to all the old music I did, and this one had some sounds in it that reminded me a little bit of Chris's other electronic. It's a little bit more dense thinly layered like my stuff usually is, but I thought it was close enough so that it kind of could fit. And yeah, so I just threw that in there. I fixed it up a little bit, but yeah, threw that in there. Yep.
I think it fits perfectly. It's all the tracks have uniqueness and their own touches to them, and I think that's what kind of the whole soundtrack is about. Yeah, there's some kind of repeating themes and some reoccurring melodies and stuff, but there's also a lot of different styles and diversity in the music, and I think it doesn't sound like it, other than that the 144 marching 44 or whatever. I think everything fits.
Although I do think that 144 is meant to sound a little bit like out of place.
Oh,
so,
of course,
yeah,
of
definitely.
course.
Actually, one of the reasons why I was really interested in talking to you guys is because it's really not very common for us to see this kind of collaboration between the lead designer, who is also a musician, and the composer. And, we heard you guys talk a whole bunch about how you collaborated, and, I was just really happy to see that you got some of your tracks in the game. They tend to be a lot more like incidental spots, like you go into the club and they're playing like a version of the Dropsy theme sort of as a dance track. There's a lot of that sort of thing.
Oh, I love it. And Dropsy like starts twerking or whatever.
Yeah, that's another farty thing since I coined that term now.
Oh man, I was cracking up so hard. Middle of the night here, and I was just laughing.
Yeah, there's that. There's the dream air sequences also.
That's bizarre. Yeah.
And did I do anything else? I don't know. Yeah, but it was definitely like. So when I got signed with Devolver, I was like, well, shoot, I gotta get some of my music in this dang game in case it gets really big. So that then, because music's what I always I gave up on games for a long time because the indie market didn't exist yet. There wasn't indie games, you had to join a big studio. So I tried to do music for a long time as a thing that, to get me out of being a telemarketer, and that really is I think I have more fun doing music, making music. Just the process is just more fun and more relaxing to me. And games are a little more, your mind's always running and you're always worrying about tying all the bits together, So yeah, I think I made sure to try to get some of my own junk in there a little bit.
Oh, I would have done the same.
Yeah.
I would have started put my stuff in there to where hey, at least maybe somebody will hear it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think it's time that the show kind of winds down. Today we covered Dropsy, the point and click Hugventure, designed by Jay Tholen and composed by both Jay Tholen and Chris Schlarb.
If you want more on the show, then check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and the track list. We can also be found on social media. The best way to join the discussion is on our Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes in your favorite podcast apps, or get there from the website.
Yeah, and we want to say, a big thank you to everybody who asked questions on our Discord server for both Chris and Jay. There was Maynard, Electric Boogaloo, Weasel, and Ed from the VGMC. And so I want to say thank you guys. Really means a lot that you had some questions to submit because, there was a lot of information given today, and so we kind of threw them in when we could. Also want to give a shout out to our sister site VGM Rips, where you can find high quality, sample accurate music for a lot of different arcade games, FM synth stuff. And if you like the show, if you want to leave us comments or feedback, you can go to the website and comment on this episode, or leave us a review on iTunes. That always means a lot. Also, check out our Patreon page if you want to support the show. As little as $1 a month can help feed this starving gene. No, I'm just kidding.
No, I eat quite enough. Don't worry about me. If you're new to our podcast, make sure to check out some of our past episodes, like episode 92, where we covered Cuphead with the composer Christopher Madigan and the Mexican Runner. Episode 65, Red Alarm on the Virtual Boy, and episode 12, Castlevania Bloodlines on the Sega Genesis.
Yep. Chris and Jay, I want to say thank you guys both. Chris is spiritually here.
Yes.
But it was awesome having him on. Jay, thank you so much. It was just so insightful to hear your process. Oh, thank you very much.
I appreciate all of the work you guys put into your questions and research and everything. It's great.
It's fun for us. It's letting the composers and developers talk about their passions and their projects is the most meaningful thing, and it's just the best way for us to express our appreciation for the kind of work that you're putting in. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
And anyways, the track taking out the show, we're talking about the different dub, and we've heard kind of a lot in the soundtrack so far. This is a really awesome track, and I think it's a great way to take out the show. It's called Lee's Vampire Dub, and this was composed by Chris Schlarb again. Thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Jay, for joining us. Chris, you as well, up there in the clouds, wherever you are listening. And,
You're welcome.
Down in Southern California.
Yeah. We hope you guys had a good time talking with us, and thank you, everybody, again, for listening and supporting us this far. Again, this is Lee's Vampire Dub. See you guys in a few weeks for the next episode.
And then in unison, we say, and you're listening to...
or I didn't think of it like that, but if you want to do it that way, like the Mickey Mouse Club or something, we could do it. No, and Jay, you can just finish it off or something.
Sure.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
This is Jay Tholen.
And this is Chris Schlarb.
And you're listening to Pixelated Audio.
Oh, is that I have to say that?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Jesus Christ. All right. No problem. Okay, let's do it one more time, and we'll tag team this thing like some UWF shit.
All right, okay. Sounds good.
Okay. This is Jay. Okay, ready? Okay. This is Jay Tholen.
And this is Chris Schlarb.
And you're listening to Pixelated Audio.
Episode number 103, featuring the music of Dropsy.
Ooh, I like it.
Sounds good.
Sounds great.